There you are. Thank you for joining us this evening, Dr. Stollar. Let me introduce Dr. Stollar to you, those of you that might not be familiar with Dr. Stollar. First and foremost, she is a gift to the science of reading community and the literacy community at large. She is authentic, she is kind, she is available, and she is an expert. Dr. Stollar is the creator of the Reading Science Academy. I'm going to read this straightforward, friends, because there's so much we don't want to miss. She is the former vice president for the professional learning at Acadience Learning Incorporation. She's a part-time professor at the Mount St. Joseph University, a founding member of the National Alliance for Supporting Reading Science in Higher Education. She has worked as an educational consultant, school psychologist, and as an assistant professor in the school psychology program as a at the University of South Florida. She has been providing professional development for 25 years, has conducted research and assessment, early intervention, and collaborative problem solving. In Michigan, we know she is a friend to the Michigan MTSS Association department, our Michigan My MTSS program, and she is actively plans the conference for I believe it's the national conference, right, Dr. Stollar, for MTSS innovations.
That's right.
All right, so I will turn the stage over to you and let the rest of these folks in.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Thanks for the invitation to be here with all of you tonight. One notable item that you didn't hear Rebecca say is that I have never been a coach. So I am here to learn from all of you tonight. I have worked with coaches. I have observed coaching happening. I have been coached myself, but that's not a role that I've ever had. So the closest I've come is working in a consultative way with teachers. And I think there are lots of parallels there. But I'm not going to be talking to you tonight from a role specific perspective. You've got other colleagues who can help you in that way. What I'm going to try to do today is hopefully get you to think about your role as a coach, perhaps in a slightly different way. So my focus is on systems change. That is my ultimate goal. So I tend to see students as being learners who are learning to read in complex host environments. That's the way I think about schools, classrooms within schools, within districts, within communities. So I tend to take this sort of big picture view and think about the ripples that happen when we are trying to make changes, ultimately improving reading outcomes for individual students, what can happen as a result of those changes for individuals, but also how do we look at those systems as points of influence on individual students? For me, this just gives me more hope. It gives me a bigger perspective for thinking about influencing change. If I'm targeting working with one-on-one with students or in small groups with students, to me, that feels like a very powerful and important role, but also in some ways limited, because my work with those individual students has to happen within those larger contexts. If I can influence a teacher, many of you are in the role of not just intervening with individuals, but coaching classroom teachers, then you make an impact on all of the students that teacher is currently working with and will work with in the future. And if you can coach building principals or district administrators, if you're working at those levels, then you have the opportunity to influence all of the staff that those leaders and administrators come in contact with. So that's sort of the perspective that I'm coming from today, is opportunities to influence change within the system that every child is learning to read in. Because I bet you've had the experience at whatever level you're coaching where you run up against what I call the yes buts. Yes, we would like to implement that program, but we haven't been trained. Yes, I'd like to move away from balanced literacy instruction, but I don't really know what that means. Yes, I would like to do small group instruction, but I don't have time in my day. All the excuses, which excuse isn't even the right word, all of the barriers that are very real in schools for why we can't make that change that would benefit a student. Those are the factors that I'd like you to be thinking about in this conversation today. So if you are in a direct service role where you are influencing what happens with individual students, you certainly have that opportunity to influence intervention. You may be coaching teachers and coaching them in an instructional coaching role, so improving the practices and knowledge of individual teachers. I'm going to be encouraging you tonight to think about expanding your role either formally or informally to what I think about as coaching systems. So making those barriers go away systematically so that every single student and every teacher has the maximum opportunity of benefiting from the work that you are doing with them. So Rebecca, I'm going to ask you to be my eyes in the chat and free me up from trying to multitask at 7 o'clock in the evening, if you don't mind interrupting. Just unmute and interrupt when there are questions that come into the chat that we need to deal with. Okay. Okay, so Rebecca mentioned the Reading League, and if you're not a member of that free professional association, you should sign up right away. One of the products of the Reading League has been the definition of the science of reading and the defining guide that goes along with that definition. You can download the defining guide document free from the Reading League's website, or you can purchase a print version. It looks like this. This allows us all to be talking about the same thing when we say the science of reading. And the defining guide is quite informative. It's easy to read. It's written for educators, and you should definitely read through it and share it with people you work with. But I want to just focus in on a couple of components of that guide tonight to point out to you that this systems perspective is sort of baked into the science of reading. It has to do with improving outcomes through prevention and intervention. So what are the structures that have to be in place to make that happen? What are the systems that support or work against prevention and intervention? That's sort of the topic that I'd like to chat with all of you about tonight. In the defining guide, within the definition of the science of reading, you'll find MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, as the framework for improving student outcomes. This is the mechanism for getting the science of reading institutionalized within a school system. The science of reading is not a fad, it's not a trend, it's not an ideology, it's not a belief system, it's not a thing that we take off the shelf. It's not a program. It is a vast body of evidence that we can put into practice to benefit our students. And to do that, to get to the place where we are actually using reading research in schools, we need to build this multi-tiered system of support for academics. Now, you're probably familiar with an integrated model of MTSS that deals with prevention and intervention around behavior, so positive behavior intervention and supports. And you know that MTSS on the academic side involves more than just reading, but I'm going to focus in only on reading and, for the most part, on early literacy tonight. You hopefully are familiar with the MTSS model. There may be some aspects of the way that I view this model again, as the framework for implementing the science of reading, that's different from what you are used to hearing. So I think I'll just spend a few minutes describing the way that I think about this model. How can this be the framework for improving reading outcomes in your school, for implementing what's known in the reading research to benefit your students? This to me is part of the definition of the science of reading, because it is the how do we implement piece. This is originally from public health, and the connection to schools is in terms of having 3 tiers of prevention of reading failure that get built within your system using all of the resources that you have available, working through any of the barriers that exist to making that happen, and efficiently lining up the needs of your students to the instructional systems. Sometimes people talk about this 3-tiered model in terms of the students. You'll hear people say, our tier 1 students are doing this or that, or our tier 2 students, or what's even more difficult to hear is, what are we going to do tomorrow with our red students? Who's going to be working with the yellow students, right? And what I think people are missing when they use that kind of language is that these are meant to be 3 interdependent and related systems of support. We don't have tier 1 kids. We don't have tier 1 teachers. We don't have tier 2 time of day. We don't have a tier 3 room. We don't have a tier 2 program. These are systems of support. So that involves all of the components, the adults who are involved, the time that's involved, the materials, the instructional routines, the grouping practices, and the data that are used for those systems. This bottom of the cone is what we talk about as primary prevention of reading failure. This is the tier 1 instructional system, that universal system of instruction that all students access. It is aligned to the reading research. It is delivered during a protected block of time in your schedule. It is highly differentiated, making use of universal screening data to identify the needs of your students and build a first reading instruction system in the regular education classroom that is exquisitely lined up to the needs of the students that have been identified in the universal screening. So one of the things that people miss when they implement MTSS is that it is a school change model. It is directed at what happens in the general education classroom first and foremost. So your tier 1 system of support should cause the vast majority of your students to get to your grade level expectations. We use 80% as that vast majority number. Then the tier 2 system of support, we talk about as secondary prevention of reading failure. These are the things that we do for the students who are at risk after the provision of effective tier 1 or universal instructional supports. Once we've reduced the number of students who are at risk, we can give them that extra dose at tier 2, that intervention system that is aligned to what happens in tier 1, but it is going on at another time of day because students who are at risk need more and better instruction for the purpose of catching up. So we don't provide tier 2 intervention to accommodate and sort of meet kids where they are and accommodate their needs there. We provide tier 2 in addition to tier 1 for the purpose of accelerating students and catching them up to the grade level expectations. So tier 2 has to be even more targeted at student needs. We use screening data here. We use diagnostic data to identify those needs. And we use progress monitoring to make sure that we change our intervention if we find that it's not working for an individual student. One of the common mistakes that I see with implementing a tier 2 system is that schools try to take students out of tier 1 instruction to give them their tier 2 intervention.
Oh, yeah, you get the whole thing.
And that's missing the fact that tier 2 is supposed to be that extra dose. So it won't be an extra dose. It won't be extra minutes for students who are at risk if they are coming out of tier 1 instruction to get their intervention.
Thank you.
And they would end up with the exact same number of minutes of instruction. And that is not an extra
Well, that's what
dose.
Sydney wanted. She made a special request.
Somebody is unmuted. And I'm not seeing a way to mute her. Okay, I think she caught it. Good. Okay, so then tier 3 is what we talk about as tertiary prevention of reading failure. This is what we do for students who are struggling readers, students who are already experiencing reading difficulty. It is the most intensive instructional system. So intensity, you can think about in terms of the training and skill level of the instructor, in terms of the dosage. So the most time, number of meetings throughout the week, the explicitness of the instruction, being aligned very, very closely to what students need. That makes it more intensive, more frequent progress monitoring, and more individualized reinforcement system. Those would be ways of thinking about tier 3. So I want to just pause and see if there are any questions about the 3-tiered model, any clarification about that introduction.
We don't have anything in the chat. Is there any questions for anyone that you want to just open mic?
Anybody want to unmute with a question?
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear
Yes.
me?
I can, yes.
All right. So I sometimes hear from teachers the struggle that they don't feel equipped for providing the targeted strategies in tier 1 for students who will also be receiving tier 2. What would you do in such a case?
Yes, well, I'm nodding, first of all, because this is what we have set up for ourselves historically, is 2 separate systems. It starts in pre-service training. We train teachers, if you are a regular education teacher or a special education teacher, we train them in parallel. We tell general education teachers that they aren't equipped, what you're describing, they're not equipped to work with students who have learning difficulties. We tell them that there are experts, that we send them out of the classroom for them to get their instruction from an expert who's specially trained. So it's no surprise that teachers would say that they don't feel equipped to provide that small group support to students who are at risk in tier 1. So even in asking that question, you're bringing up some of the systems and structures related to implementing MTSS that need to be worked through. One of them, so I've picked 4 that I have shown in a circle here that I envision as the base of this cone, right? Like you can't implement 3 tiers of support without these base systems and structures. And you're making me think about all 3 of these, but primarily the professional development or professional learning. If teachers are not feeling equipped to take on a role, we need to listen to them, and we need to be prepared as a system to provide that professional development and coaching to allow that to happen. Students who are at risk need small group instruction targeted to their skill deficits in both tier 1 and tier 2. And I think we could make the case that students who are working on more advanced skills, who need acceleration, also need that support that is aligned in small group in tier 1 and tier 2. So both ends of the continuum need that differentiation. So providing professional development and professional learning, providing a system of instructional support in terms of time for that small group to happen, bringing those other adults to the classroom during tier 1 to support the small group differentiation, and making good small group intervention materials available for teachers to use in tier 1 small group instruction. And then finally, the PD related to assessment, having good high quality assessments, but also training folks in how to interpret and use them. Though your question just brought up all of those systems and structures. It's the perfect example of the yes buts. Yes, we'd like to provide small group, but et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have a number more questions in the chat. Do you want to
Oh,
hold
good.
them and move on and hold them to the
No.
end, or do you want to answer now?
No, let's go ahead now. Yep. If it's
Okay,
on people's mind now, let's talk about it.
perfect. Emily, do you want to open mic with your question? You want to mute?
Sorry, also giving my children a bath right now.
It's okay.
Multitasking. I just had a question. We've had some debates among our tier support staff on how far in our tier 2 instruction to go back to kind of the lowest area of deficit, the earliest area of need, versus how much to kind of reinforce the on grade level content that's happening. So I was curious your thoughts there with where to align that intervention.
Yeah, this is a really important question, and it's a little bit difficult to answer in the abstract and general kind of way, because it might be the case that you have to do both. That's what I'm hemming and hawing about. Students will make the most progress when they have instruction that's targeted at the next step for their instruction. So it meets them where they are, and it accelerates their progress to move forward. Students don't tend to make much progress when instruction is targeted at skills that are beyond where they are working currently. They don't have the prerequisites. It's over their head, so to speak. That's not typically a good use of time. So in general, it's best for that small group instruction, even if it needs to be working on skills that are below grade level, as you said, that generally tends to be the best approach. Now, that's not saying that that's for the entire day for that student, but just on those very targeted skills. Depending on the grade level, you know, this becomes more obvious and important to do that kind of differentiation at the student's lowest deficit skill as they get older. I have seen in kindergarten and first grade, when schools start with a very effective whole group instructional approach, a core program that's highly effective, I've seen them be able to keep even students at diverse places in their learning, keep them all together and move them together in whole group instruction with some pre-teaching and reteaching in small group. I've seen that happen very successfully in the beginning grades. When students, when your school is very transient, when you have a lot of mobility, kids moving in and out, and when you are just starting a high quality core reading program in like 3rd or 4th grade, I think it's going to be really tough to operate in that way. I think you're going to have to differentiate and deliver that instruction in targeted small groups. That's just from my experience.
Stephanie, we have one more question in the chat that kind of segues, it is connected to that.
Okay.
No, do you want to ask your question about tier 1 instruction?
Is that me? I think so.
Yeah.
Hey, Dr. Who?
Go ahead. You go ahead and ask your
Oh,
question.
okay. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. I said, at what tiers do support staff? Oh, that's not me, is it? Where is my
Okay.
question? I've forgotten what I wanted to ask. Okay. Okay. So we have an influx and we are a transient school. So we have a large population of ELL and identified SPED students. And these group of children are being pulled multiple times a day. So is it more important that they're getting pulled for ELL services or your tier 2 systematic instruction? I guess is what my question is, because we have some ELL kids that are being pulled 50 minutes a day, and then they want me to pull them for an additional 40.
Yeah, again, it's really challenging to answer those questions in general, because sometimes it depends on the needs of the individual students. But the best I can tell you in general is effective implementation of MTSS is going to provide that differentiated support that students need, whether they are English learners, whether they are gifted students, whether they are students with disabilities. Provide the differentiation in tier 1 and tier 2. Okay, this is the thing that most schools are getting wrong. And it sounds like maybe what is happening in your district. We can't take students out of their 2 hours of tier 1 reading instruction to get intervention, because then they are not getting 2 hours of reading instruction plus intervention. They're getting the same number of instructional minutes that students who don't have those challenges are getting. And how can we expect those students who have diverse learning challenges to catch up in the same amount of time? So this is why the MTSS model is depicted as a triangle. This is why there are different colors, sort of designating these different systems of support, is because tier 2 is meant to rest on top of the base of tier 1. It's not like, I'm not thinking of a good analogy. It's meant to rest on top of, not replace what's happening in tier 1. Now, a clarification that I want to make about that, because this is often misunderstood as well. People hear all students are accessing tier 1 and they think that means all whole group for 2 hours. And that actually couldn't be farther from the truth. What we need to be doing in tier 1 is using universal screening data to identify the needs of all students, and then bringing those additional adults to support the differentiation, the small targeted groups that happen during tier 1. So if you have students who are English learners, they have additional needs. Those needs need to be met in tier 1 and in tier 2. If you have students who have disabilities like dyslexia, their needs need to be met in tier 1 and tier 2 or 3, whatever the case may be. So it's not intervention or tier 1 instruction, it's intervention in addition to tier 1 instruction. And that tier 1 instruction is not everybody getting the same thing in the same way on the same day in a whole group, because that's not what you typically have in your classroom. You typically have a wide range of students. So I don't know if you want to ask a follow-up to that, or if that addresses what your question was about.
You answer it. I guess the follow-up would be, if 80% of the grade level is not meeting expectation, that means we need to change our tier 1 instruction, correct?
You got it. That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we can't expect an intervention system to make up for 90 to 120 minutes of tier 1 reading instruction that's not lined up to the needs of the students. This is what we've been missing in universal screening. We've gotten good at collecting screening data, but we've limited ourselves by only using that screening data to identify individuals who are at risk, and then we're sending them out for intervention. And we're missing the opportunity that those students need, which is to differentiate their instruction, line up to their needs all throughout this three-tiered framework. So your comment there is perfect timing for my next slide, because this is a common occurrence, right? So the image here is from Acadience Learning Online. I used to work for the authors of Acadience, so it's the assessment that I'm most familiar with. I have access to the data system to be able to generate images like this, but it's representing what you just described, and the fact that in this school at the beginning, or I'm sorry, the middle of first grade, 83% of the students were at risk of not understanding what they were reading at the end of the school year. They were at risk of not being successful in the third grade achievement test. So if the majority of students are at risk, if more than 20% of the students at a grade level are at risk, your intervention system will be overwhelmed. And the kinds of things that I was saying that the tier 2 and tier 3 systems should do in terms of accelerating and catching kids up, you won't be able to do those things simply by the fact that you have too many kids who are at risk. So the job of tier 1 is risk reduction. This is the number one task in implementing the systems that support improving reading outcomes, the systems that support implementing the science of reading, is viewing tier 1 classroom reading instruction as primary prevention of reading failure. The job of the way you teach reading to everybody in the regular classroom is to shrink risk reduction. Get the number of students who need something in addition to tier 1 down to a manageable number, something like 20%. People sometimes talk about, my triangle is upside down, that, they'll say that. We have more kids who are at risk than who are not at risk. That's what you're looking at here in this school. Your triangle is always facing, this way. It's always this way because the triangle is not about students. It's about systems of instructional support, systems of prevention. And the base is always the biggest part of that image of the triangle or cone, because all students are accessing that, and it is meeting the needs of at least 80% of your grade level. If more than that are at risk, you will overwhelm your intervention system, and you won't be able to accelerate learning through that intervention system. You'll end up diluting whatever intervention system you have in place with having large groups, meeting just something like twice a week for 15 minutes, because you're trying to get around and work with everybody in small groups. If you are experiencing that, that is a systems problem, right? So that's one of the indicators that you need to think about doing business differently, not just intervening with individuals. So my suggestions when you're in this kind of situation, even if it's not quite this dire, is to concentrate on what should you be thinking about when your tier 1 instruction is not optimal and not matched to the needs of your students. What are some high leverage variables that you could think about within your system that if they changed, it would really impact outcomes for a lot of students? And then secondly, how should you think about those things? So my suggestion of a short list of things to think about are all of those yes buts that I mentioned at the onset. All of the things you sort of hit your head against when you're trying to change practice, when you're trying to coach teachers to implement the science of reading, when you're trying to bring them along in their knowledge of research-based intervention. Yes, I want to learn that, but I don't have time. Yes, I want to learn that, but I don't have good materials. Yes, I want to learn that, but our schedule doesn't allow it, right? All the yes buts. I'm suggesting that if you take a way of thinking and actually start taking on a new role, perhaps as a coach, in helping everybody in your system think about problems differently, you can get to the place where your system is good at solving problems. Any problem that comes along, whether it's an individual student problem or it is a system level problem, you'll have a way of thinking about it. Everybody will have the same process for thinking about it, and you can apply that thinking process to any problem facing your system. It will allow you to engineer the optimal conditions for every child to learn to read in. So that thinking process, the how to think piece, is the collaborative problem solving process. And you'll hear people use different terms for this. Jan Hasbrook has an excellent book, Student Focused Coaching, that talks about problem solving. It's probably the only recent publication where you're going to hear that terminology. In other circles, you'll hear the term data-based individualization or data-based decision-making. You might be familiar with something more like a plan, do, study, act cycle. All of these are similar, and it is this process of thinking. It doesn't matter what the problem is. We're going to plug it into this same 4-step model of thinking. And this problem-solving process is what fuels our teams at all levels, whether we're talking about a single student or we're talking about all third graders in our entire school district or county or state even. We can apply the same sequence of defining the problem using screening data primarily, analyzing the problem using screening and diagnostic data to help us get to the real root of why is the problem happening. So we generate a hypothesis at step 2, the most likely reason for that system or student level problem. That leads us directly into developing a plan. We're good at thinking about those intervention plans or even coaching plans for teachers. I'm asking you to stretch your thinking. What's the systems level plan for our grade level? What do we need to be thinking about in terms of the hypothesis, the most likely reason from this list that we have the resources to change? So if we changed one of these factors, it would result in eliminating the problem that we've identified. So that system level plan, we can evaluate it just like we do in an ongoing way with progress monitoring individual students. And if we see that our implementation plan is not getting the result that we want, we can cycle back either to redefining the problem or collecting additional data to analyze the problem a little bit more or changing the implementation plan. So I mapped out a couple of examples for you to see how this system level problem solving might look. Again, drawing parallels to the work that you're probably used to with individual students, if you're working as an interventionist or when you were a teacher, and you're probably used to thinking about coaching plans with staff. I'm asking you to take that to an even more macro global level and think about, in this case, first graders. So the entire first grade system. We have the difference between what's actually happening and what's desired as our problem definition. We've collected some data to analyze how and why it's happening. And our hypothesis is that the phonics program doesn't include phonemic awareness. Okay, so something about the instruction is causing these low outcomes. So our plan is directly connected to that hypothesis. Here's another example with kindergarten. So starting from the student data, the aggregate data at the grade level that comes from universal screening, analyzing why it might be happening. In this case, it was a professional learning target. This was the yes, but that was standing in the way for these kindergarten teachers. So the plan revolved around training. Oh, I thought I had a third example. Oh, there it was. I think I skipped past the third grade one. In this case, it was their problem analysis was around the skill levels of their third graders and how divergent they were across the grade. And so differentiation in tier 1 was their planning focus. Okay, so that is what I was planning to share with you tonight to extend the way that you're thinking about your role as coaches to taking on this perspective of systems change. If you can get everybody in your system thinking about the what to think about, those variables that could help improve, for example, tier 1 reading instruction, and support them with how to think about that in that problem solving model, then you have an additional opportunity to change outcomes for every student who's learning to read in that system. Okay, time for questions. I don't know if there are some in the chat or if you want to just open it up for people to turn off their or turn on their microphones, turn off the mute.
Yeah, Gail had a question and then a kind of a follow-up. Gail, do you want to open up do you want to unmute and connect?
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I was with you on all day Saturday as well. So this is
Nice.
yeah, well, I need to see things more than once. We
I'm
have
with you.
a new phonics program, multisensory, systematic. It matches our intervention. I'm the dyslexia specialist, and the program that they've adopted, K3, matches the intervention that I'm doing, and I'm seeing huge gain. I mean, even with the kids that I see that are dyslexic or SLD, huge gains. What I'm asking though is the teachers want to know or have been told that that for the 30 minutes of the whole group, tier 1 instruction, everybody is in the room and everybody is, doing the whole group activity. They do small groups at other times at skill levels, and we have SPED teachers and interventionists and paras. There's all hands on the deck kind of a thing. But the teachers, some of the teachers anyway, are concerned because for the 30 minutes, some of the students, and some of them are mine, some of them are fine and they are learning from it. I can see that they are, because when they come to me, they know things that I haven't taught them. But some of them are starting to develop some unfortunate habits. Cheating would be one, just looking at what somebody else is doing and doing it when obviously he has no idea, because some of these children don't even know all their letter sounds yet.
Mm-hmm.
How is that the best use of their 30 minutes, or this particular teacher would like to take them in a small group in the classroom and work with them more at their skill level as part of, during that 30 minutes. And then she's going to take them again for the double dose kind of a thing. But I don't know that, the gap is the gap ever going to get closed? But this particular 2 or 3 children don't seem to be getting anything that we can measure anyway out of the whole group instruction. So what is the best use? What is the model for that?
Typically, in my experience, looking at student data for that class is helpful for making the decision, what should you teach whole group and what should you teach small group? And typically, it works well to teach the language comprehension skills in whole group, to teach content and background knowledge, listening comprehension, explicit vocabulary instruction, all through discussion and read aloud. That tends to work well in a heterogeneous group because you get those positive peer models and you can strategically partner kids together. You can work on engagement strategies, working on those skills that everybody can access through their oral language, right? That tends to work better than trying to work on the word recognition skills in whole group when you have a wide range of skills.
Okay.
Does that make
You
sense?
did, no, you said it on Saturday. You even had a graphic for that now that you mentioned it. It was wonderful. So yes, thank you. That is helpful. I don't know if that's what they're going to be able to do, of course, but at least I can make the suggestion. Thank you.
There's always, because I don't know the students like you know them, right? Like there's always a possibility that with some active engagement strategies, with more differentiation, it may be possible to make that happen with a group you're just describing in whole group, but maybe working on those letter sound and decoding skills in small group is the way to go, and accessing the grade level content through oral language and read aloud would be a better fit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Nancy, did you want to pose your dilemma?
My long problem here. So I'm a first year coach. I'm coaching K through 2, although I'm currently K through 5 because my partner is out on maternity leave. I love my school. We are an inner city school that the kids have a lot of trauma, a lot of poverty, and our proficiency is at 16%. I can only ask for so much in my first year, but I know we have a tier 1 problem. I have done a lot of work with my teachers. They've seen a lot of progress. I guess my question is, how do I get my new administrator, who is amazing and wants so much better for our students? How do I get her to see that we have a tier 1 problem when they believe in what we're using, which is balanced literacy, a new spin on it?
Do you have a universal screener?
Nope.
That's where I would suggest you start. So you notice that was one of my 4 components at the base of the cone. You said something very telling when you asked your question. They believe in what they're doing.
Yes.
And you said
admin believes it. The teachers all know there's a problem. The admin believes it.
And you also said 16% proficiency.
Correct.
Right. So there's a disconnect there. So I think that's what I would encourage you to bring to light, to surface for people in any way that you can, and getting, it sounds like, the teachers to help you communicate to the administrator that there's a gap here between what our kids need, what is in the research that is suggested and shown to be effective for those needs, and what we are doing.
We have finally given decoding inventories, and what we have found that our 5th graders can't even decode CBC words at this point.
Yeah, no surprise.
Yeah.
No surprise. So if you have some teachers who are willing and, sort of already out there breaking ranks and doing things differently because they're compelled to get better results for their students, if you can have some demonstrations of that to show to the administrator.
Well, we've we did buy the new Lucy, which does have more of the decoding, and it has opened the door for me to slide in so much more small group, in particular with my kindergarten teachers who are very open to change. And I had a seasoned teacher say to me, I never even thought to have students start reading CBC words in October, November. And so they're doing it, but I'm hoping to make a difference, but there's only so much one new coach can do in a school.
What I'm suggesting is that you band together with with that teacher and other teachers who think the same way, who are willing to try different things, who are trying different things and getting different results. If you it can demonstrate that in student data, if you can use some good progress monitoring to show, as a result of teaching in this way, I'm getting this result. If you can show it on a graph to the administrator, that might be a way of opening a conversation. You know, the other thing, I see some people in this meeting who are administrators or who have been building or district leaders. The other thing that I'll mention, if you're trying to influence what your school and district leaders are attending to and doing and supporting, I think it's really important to find out what their priorities are and get your agenda, if you will. I don't mean that nefariously, to get your quest for better student outcomes to fit into what it is your administrator values, prioritizes, you know, where their bread is buttered. What are they setting as goals for themselves, for the school? You need to be linked in with what they're doing, right? Because they're pulled in 1,000 different directions. And if you're just like a little gnat out there trying to get them to attend to something else, they're going to swat you away. But if you can link what you are trying to accomplish for your students and teachers to their agenda, to their priorities, you'll be able to influence. Make it their idea, make it part of their existing priorities is the idea.
Can I tag into that?
Yeah.
Those of you that are new coaches, I promise we will have a moment where we do summits, because that's how I start my work, is with the principals, and I call it the principal's instructional goal for that particular reason. And we find a space where it is developed with either the principal and you, or the principal and instructional leadership team, so that everyone's on the same page. And in front of every minute, here's the principal's instructional meeting, here's the principal's instructional goal, and that's where we're at, that focus. So that resonates with me, Dr. Stollar, and that's how we've gotten some really good movement. So that's a classic place to start and pull all those things in. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for affirming that I was on the right track with that.
We have a few more questions.
Yeah.
Sue's had her hand raised for a bit there.
Hi, I'm from Australia, so cheeky coming in, sneaking in here, talking to you. We're still struggling to just even move on from balanced literacy in a lot of the classrooms that I work with. And I've just recently done an academic subject on MTSS in my master's with Pam Snow in Australia. I'm sure you may have heard of her.
Yes.
Very lucky. And, you know, theoretically, or in the theoretical model of RTI and MTSS, it was clearly said that everybody should all do the tier 1 instruction. So even if it's the decoding part of the simple view, all the children should. Now, this is the theory, and I'm really interested to hear in practice how this works. So sort of going on from Gail's question before. So my understanding is that everyone does tier 1, and then if children are not keeping up with that tier 1 instruction, that's when your tier 2 intervention sort of kicks in, and that could happen within the classroom or withdrawal from the classroom. But the kids who need that extra don't miss out on the tier 1 instruction. And the risk is that if they don't kind of, even though they're getting, and this is I think, Gail, I really understand your conundrum, is if they're just getting further and further behind and they're not being able to access the tier 1 instruction, do you remove them during the decoding part of the tier 1 instruction? Sorry, that was a very jumbled question, but I get a lot of pushback from teachers who are used to the balanced literacy reading groups, small reading groups, guided reading groups, about, well, that's how you do it. You don't teach whole class. Like Australian teachers in balanced literacy classrooms just do not understand how you could teach whole class. Does that
Well,
make sense?
so I think I need to clarify that I was not saying you should teach whole class. I think that's a common misunderstanding. When people hear tier 1 is all students, they assume that means everybody's getting the same thing, whole group, in the same way. And that's actually not the case. That's not the model. The model would be tier 1 is highly differentiated. That's the reason to do the screening, universal screening, is to know how should you design and differentiate your tier 1 instruction. What parts should you do whole group and small group? How should you group your students for tier 1 instruction? That's the part that most people are missing or misunderstanding. So tier 1
Okay.
is not all whole group.
Yep. So that's really important distinction to make. So then, in a way, if you're in a bigger school and you can arrange your literacy block, so you group your students to walk to intervention, if you like, then that works better. What do you
Yes.
do if you're in a little school that has one grade prep, one year 1?
Yeah. So you have to get creative. You may work with the neighboring grade. So the first grade and second grade teachers might pair up because you have second graders who have the exact same next step for their phonics instruction that first graders do. And you might have to have flexible service delivery in terms of the other adults in the school. So you are using your special educator to support small group instruction in tier 1, any para educators. I've seen schools train art, music, gym, librarian, bus drivers, and cafeteria workers in reading intervention, and they help differentiate tier 1. So, it depends on what your resources are. That's the problem solving process, right? Like once people learn how to think in that problem solving model, they can say, well, we only have one first grade, one second grade, but we have kids with all of these different range of needs. How are we going to organize ourselves as adults to meet these needs? What's the structure that we need to put in place? That would happen, at a grade level planning meeting or a building planning meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Hey, Stephanie, could I add in on that?
Yeah. Hi, Sharon.
Hi. Yeah, I hear what she's saying. It's, you definitely can differentiate in homeroom or core. Tier 1 instruction, we had really good results taking a portion of that ELA block, and it was we had 120 minutes, sometimes 150 minutes, but within that block, we had a 45-minute walk to learn within. And I know it's difficult with one teacher per grade level, but as Stephanie said, you can pair up with the grade level below or above, or pull in as many adults as possible in pairs. But we had, for our intensive learners, our kids that really needed that double dose within core, they weren't accessing core because they were so far behind. We had that specialized instruction word work for them. And the rest of the kids had instruction that was targeted for them, but it wasn't the vocabulary comprehension, read aloud, complex text, as Stephanie was building background, as Stephanie was mentioning. So it was a portion of the day for everybody to get specifics of what they needed within core.
Yeah.
Hope that makes sense.
Yep. Last call. Do we have final questions? Comments? Good ideas to share?
Hi, Stephanie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sue, I just want to say I'm in Australia too, and I hear what you were saying there before. I think there's some confusion, particularly in my school at least, around who's responsible for what tier. There seems to be this idea that the teachers are responsible for that tier 1, but then once students are in that tier 2, tier 3, that's not their responsibility anymore. So I just wanted to know your thoughts around how I overcome that, or how I explain. Like, I liked what you were saying there before about that tier 2 is additional. So like our foundation is tier 1 and we're laying upon that base by providing the tier 2, but exactly where, like in Australia, we have teacher aides, so support staff in our classrooms. Are they coming in at that tier 2 level to provide that small group intervention? Or also we have like speeches, OTs, all that reading interventionists and things like that. And myself as a literacy coach, am I coming in at tier 3, or am I coming, like, there's a little bit of, I'd just like a bit of clarification around where
it really depends on your data, on your student needs. So this grade level team is the environment where this problem solving happens. And you have to have good universal screening data. So you can sit down as a grade level team, and that includes those learning support people you mentioned, and yourself and paraprofessionals. Anybody who supports that grade or could support that grade, special educators and so on, sits down as a grade level with the grade level data, and you group students based on skills, and then you decide during the 90 to 120 minutes of tier 1, who's going where to support which group of students. And then which group of students are going to get a second dose of that same small group targeted instruction at another time of day as their tier 2.
Okay, I think that's the part that I was missing the clarification around, because we certainly are doing that. We're doing the screening, we're doing the grouping, we're then pulling in like our inclusion support teams who are part of those conversations around what kind of intervention is going to happen. I think that point about this is a double dose, like, so my tier 2 should be seen as the extra doses of support.
That's right.
Yeah. And then the tier 3 is really that really specialist honed, for those students needing that really like top level support.
In addition to their differentiated tier 1, yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. I think I've tried that now.
Good. So I see a hand up, Rebecca.
Yep, Robin.
Robin,
Yes, I just see that. Yes, Robin.
Hi. I'm wondering about what that looks like in a grade like 3rd grade. So we use CKLA, and the knowledge strand and the skills are integrated. And so how would you differentiate that in a grade where it's assumed that kids know how to decode the text?
Well, you have to use your data to determine, do the students have the skills to decode the text?
Okay, so if they don't, would you say, since it's all integrated, would it be like we would read the text to them so they're still getting the vocabulary, and then we're using the rest of that time to do that decoding work?
Yes. Yes. So you, if they don't have the skills to read the grade level content, you would be doing that through read aloud. You would be working on those skills through discussion and reading aloud, not by having them read it independently and then do something with it, because they don't have the skills to read it independently.
Got it. Thank you.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's the differentiation. That's the data-based decision making, right? It's using your screening data to make those decisions about what are we going to teach, when, to whom, and how.
Very good. I feel like that is the great wrap up there, right? How are we using our data to inform instruction, that it's intentional, and we do this as a team?
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time. Thank you, everyone who came here in person after a long day of work.
Yeah, I want to give
community.
Huge shout out to all of you literacy leaders and warriors out there doing this really important work. I want to give you all a big hug, a big high five, a big pat on the back. Keep it up. You're doing great work. And I'm out here watching you, and I see you doing wonderful things. So I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us, Stephanie.
My
And
pleasure.
anyone that wants to contact me, I'm trying to change this to everyone. I'll throw my email in the chat. If you have any questions, you're a new coach, you want to process this, feel free to reach out, and don't neglect going to the Facebook page and putting your questions there for the rest of your colleagues that have been at this. We are here to be a community to support each other. Thank you again. And will we be getting the recording? It will be on, I will put it up on the site, and anyone that registered will get an email with the link as well. All right. And if you have not joined Dr. Stollar's Reading Academy, you'll want to consider that as a resource as well, with that support from her directly. So Stephanie, do you want to say the link? Do you have a link to that?
Yeah, Reading Science Academy, readingscienceacademy.com is where you can find out all about that subscription membership.
Thank you so much.
Put it in the chat.
Okay. All right, I'll give you all a chance to get that. And with that, we'll say good night and thank you, Dr. Stollar. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.